योऽन्तः प्रविश्य मम वाचमिमां प्रसुप्तां सञ्जीवयत्य अखिलशक्तिधरस्वधाम्ना अन्यांश हस्तचरणश्रवणत्वगादीन् प्राणान्नमो भगवते पुरुषाय तुभ्यम्। सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। ओम श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ओम। Hello everyone, welcome to Vedic Insights. So today we are going to talk a little bit more about the Pravesha exam. So last time I introduced the Pravesha book to all of you and mentioned that it's a good starting point to learn Sanskritam. So I can walk you through some of my experiences learning the course as well as taking the exam. So yeah, let's get started. So Pravesha exam is the exam that tests the contents of the Pravesha book, and the course actually covers quite a bit of ground, but it does so in a very systematic manner. So you end up learning the fundamentals in a very nice pace. There are 10 chapters, and each chapter introduces bit by bit the foundational elements of the language. So in terms of what exactly those bits are, so one part of it is definitely the basic Sanskritam vocabulary. The book does a very good job of presenting the vocabulary in clusters of words that are related to each other. So the first chapter I think has all the relationships. So it has, Mata, Pita, Janakaha, Janani, so those kinds of words. And it talks about who the mother, father, uncle, brother, children, etc. So the second chapter goes and talks about like another cluster and so on, and then you'll get into the point where there'll be things like animals or vegetables or flowers. So it does a good job of clustering them, and then it helps you remember all of these words when you're actually going and taking the exam, and the exam tests your memory there. Then the other part of what the book starts with is the verb forms. So there will be two types of verb forms. We'll get into that in a little bit detail. But the book actually only covers active voice. So it doesn't do passive voice in the book at all, which makes things simpler in terms of the number of things that we have to learn. Needless to say, verb forms will occur in the first, second, and the third person, and they'll be covered in terms of present tense, past tense, and future tense, of course. The one new thing that at least I came across is this new form of a verb called order or request. So Sanskritam makes a difference between when an order is passed or when a request is made compared to all other ways in which you express a verb. So something like would you please go is like considered a very different way to say the verb go compared to you go or you are going, so I think that you are going is different from you go, I guess. So it's I think it's a bit hard to convert it into English, but you'll get a sense for it when it's used in the language. So think of it as somebody is not doing what you're asking them to do, and then you want to convince them that they're supposed to do that. So I think that would be the order request form. But in barring that, there isn't a lot that's different compared to all the other languages that you have, especially the Indian languages. So then the next part is the noun forms. I said the dreaded Vibhakti Rupani because anyone who's learned any bit of Sanskrit in the past, I think this is the place where everyone gets stuck because there are so many different types of nouns, right? And in Sanskritam, the nouns actually are classified by how the noun actually ends. So there will be, akaranta pullinga, they say. So for example, it's that just means that it's the male noun that ends in a. So similarly there will be an ikaranta pullinga. So it will be like a male noun that ends with e, and so on. So you'll have so depending on what the noun ends with, the way in which you fuse things like, oh, this is for him, or this is to him, or this is from him, or this is of him. These are all So in English, the words of, for, etc. are all split out from the noun. But in Sanskritam, they're actually fused with the noun. So it actually makes the language a little bit easier to learn, because you don't have to guess at where that of belongs. Like, I think because it's fused with the noun, you know that of actually belongs to that particular noun. So there's no confusion when you're reading Sanskritam sentences. But the problem with this is that there is 7 different cases, they're called, and each of the 7 cases have 3 different numbers. So ekavachana, dvivachana, and bahuvachana. And then there are several noun endings. So you can imagine now you have 7 times 3, which is 21. So you have to learn 21 words for every ending of the noun. The good news is, by and large, in the Pravesha textbook, you will stick to the akaranta pullinga or ikaranta pullinga, and then akaranta strilinga, and I think ikaranta strilinga words. So you just really have like 4 different types of nouns. So yes, it is memorization, but it is done in piecemeal. So you think of yourself as having 10 to 12 weeks to prepare for the exam. If you give yourself that time, then you can easily get it and you can learn it. And then there are patterns that repeat themselves. So it'll not be that you're learning, for example, 21 distinct words, right? Like, even though it's a 7x3 grid. So that's something that is also covered, starting, I think, somewhere in the middle, about like 3rd or 4th chapter. But first you deal with verbs, you get a hold of what the verbs are, then you move to the nouns, then you learn the declensions, they're called, or the cases for the noun. And then you also, along the way, pick up some miscellaneous grammatical things like indeclinables. So stuff that doesn't change with tense, stuff that doesn't change with number. So these words are some things that you'll use on a daily basis when you're speaking Sanskritam. So, for example, and, or, things like if, then, as, so, when. So all of these things will be kind of packed in through various chapters. So you'll learn them again piecemeal. You'll also learn other things like easy alternatives to expressing verbs. So just as I told you earlier, verb forms are, you have present tense, past tense, order, request, future tense, and then you have 3 persons, and then you have 3 numbers. So now sometimes what happens is, that is a lot of words, and it may make sense to reduce the complexity a little bit, and that option is available for things like past tense. For example, you don't have to learn so many different words. You can reduce the number. So these kinds of shortcuts are also talked about, and yes, it's a lot of random facts, if you will, but they are spaced out, so you'll have time to remember them and study them, apply them, etc. Then every chapter also has a simple story at the end of it. I really like these stories because it not only gives you an outlook into how the lessons material is actually put into effect, but it's done in a manner that's very, very easy to understand. So there's short sentences. You really start getting used to constructing sentences with these stories. So, and then there will be also a very important part of learning a language is asking questions and answering them. So that is something that you can also practice with the story construction. And then my personal favorite is, there is a lot of things, surprisingly, about the Indian culture and literature that are actually discussed even in the Pravesha book. I don't know what's available in Parichaya yet. When I start, I'll probably make a video on that. But it discusses everything from, what are the ancient texts, what are the Vedas, what are the Upanishads, where did they come from, what are the kavyas that you have, so what is the literature that's available. I believe in the modern day, like, we've not really paid attention to Indian literature. I think everyone takes pride in quoting from Shakespeare, but I have not seen people quote from, Raghuvansham or something. So I think it's pretty awesome that, like, the book actually introduces you to some of the interesting stuff in the Indian history as well. So yeah, so there is a section at the end of each chapter that discusses various parts of this. And then I think there's also one more section at the end of every chapter that discusses the concepts of gods and goddesses in the form of verses. So it'll write out a verse and it'll kind of describe what the meaning of that verse is. This is interesting. I think, again, like not a lot of people know and understand what they are chanting, for example, or what the priests are chanting when they go to the temple. So I think understanding is key to appreciating something. That's my personal opinion. So it helps with that. So when you say, for example, Shuklam Varadharam Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavadanam Dhyayet Sarva Vignopashantaye. So when you chant that, what does that even mean, right? Like you know that everyone chants it when like they light a lamp, but that's all most people I would say know about it. But here is an opportunity for us to really understand what that actually means, and the understanding comes from the understanding of the language. So I think it's tied in very closely to learning Sanskritam as well. So that's the other part that occurs in every chapter. Yeah, so there are some really cool riddles as well at the end of each chapter. These are things that, for example, kids would like really enjoy, because kids tend to not judge things, and they have a true sense of enjoying things in life. So I think, but there's no reason why we can't be like kids and also enjoy them. And I think their solutions are also provided. Don't peek. Try to guess. And then there is some word play, and there is metaphor, and there is like contextual meaning and all of that stuff that comes in. But yeah, so there are some cool riddles that you get to work out. And finally, there is Subhashitani. I think so. This one is very useful, especially today. I'm actually realizing that some of these are applicable to me as I conduct my day-to-day activities and look at various complicated situations that life puts you in. So I think, yeah, so those are the things that broadly this course covers. So every chapter will be broken out into all of these things. Not an overwhelmingly large amount of information for every chapter, but at the end of Pravesha course, you will realize that you've actually picked up a lot. So yeah, so that's the overview of the course. Next, I think one thing I do want to kind of definitely share here is a list of items that I felt were either hindering me in being efficient while learning, or things that I saw other people do, which were quite useful. So yeah, so the first one is please stop thinking in English. I know it's irony when I'm actually making this entire video in English, but and I'm then asking you not to think in English. Unfortunate, we can't help it. I mean, like, I think a lot of the middle class, urban, educated Indian youth today probably speaks and thinks in English more than their mother tongues or Sanskritam. So I think the reason I say this is not because English, is something, bad or something like that, but it's just not compatible with the way Sanskritam is structured. If you do have to think about things in another language to make sense of Sanskritam, I would say think about your Indian mother tongue. So if you think in Hindi, or I would say, like Marathi or Telugu or Gujarati, it will make a lot more sense, especially when it comes to learning declensions, especially when it comes to the various verb forms that you have, sentence construction, things like that. Vocabulary, of course, like a big part of that. So while there are cognate words in English, which kind of sound like the ones in Sanskritam, the language is just too far away with respect to how it's structured and the ideas. So I think as much as possible while learning the Sanskritam language, even though you're reading it in English, I would encourage you to also double up and think about Sanskritam in your own parent language or mother tongue if you're Indian. If you're not Indian, of course, can't be helped. You'll have to push on and learn it in English. Of course, I have learned Sanskritam primarily through the medium of English. So it by no means is like a debilitating factor, but it is easier if you spend time thinking about your own language. Then, yeah, about memorization, I think I briefly alluded to it in the past video, but yes, memorization is required. But the best way to get through it is to do a small but consistent amount of memorization. So don't try to memorize large chunks of the language in one shot. If you do that, then and you don't practice for a while, it'll just fizzle away. We all are familiar with this feeling where we think we know something and then 5 days later suddenly everything is a blank. Especially as you get older, I think it's better to start small and keep a regular habit. Write down on a whiteboard or like on a piece of paper somewhere, and keep writing over and over again whenever you find time. Just keep revising in your mind. Definitely have a group of people who are learning to speak in Sanskritam would be amazing. This is one thing I benefited from a lot and I'm still benefiting from. It's better to find people who are in the same boat, because you don't get this feeling of, oh my god, it's so awkward to speak in Sanskritam and I'm making a lot of mistakes. Find people who are actually equally passionate about the subject, and you can definitely pick up the language faster. Yeah, don't judge. Be a 5-year-old again and have fun with the language. So one of the funny incidents that had happened with me while I was chatting with some of my friends was, so suddenly the instructor in the class that I was a part of had said, a lamp is called Deepaha. So, and a stick is called Dandaha. So, a tube light, which is a lamp in the shape of a stick, is called Danda Deepaha. So, my friend immediately said, well, then what do we call a lightsaber, right, in Star Wars? So, immediately, a suggestion was made that it can be called Deepadandaha, because it's a light, but that's a stick, as opposed to a stick that is a light. Anyway, so just have fun. I mean, I think there is just so much to explore in the language, and it's just such a beautifully constructed language. I think having fun is okay, and you don't have to be all serious about it when you're learning the language and all. It's don't put it on a pedestal. Like, I think learn it like you would learn any other language, and have fun with it. It's okay to make mistakes, especially when you're starting off. It's probably encouraged, and then over a period of time you'll develop a comfort level with manipulating the words, the verbs, the nouns, the declensions, and all of that. One last point I heard, which was very interesting, and I'm still processing this. I don't know if I'll be able to really get on board with this particular idea, but I thought I'd share here nevertheless, because some people may find it useful, is this order of how do you learn something. So you go from, generally in our lives now in modern day, kids start by writing stuff, and then as they write, they read what they're writing. And then as they read it out loud. And then as they read it out loud, they hear everybody else read it out loud. So it's basically, that's the order of learning a language like English, for example. So you start with writing, then you read, then you speak it, and then you hear various things in the language. But a lot of the instructors that I met had told me that that's actually maybe not very optimal when it comes to Sanskritam. In Sanskritam, it's very important to have a good, clear enunciation, because for the language in most of Indian languages, I would say, you write the language exactly as you say it. So there is no concept of what you would call an accent. This is very evident when you go and you see somebody, so let's say in Kashmiri temples, reciting the Krishna Yajurveda, versus like a temple in Kanyakumari who's reciting the Krishna Yajurveda, you will really not find any differences in accent. And that's because the sound is the prime concept in Indian languages. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the recommendation was to start with listening to the language. Start by hearing other people speak it, hearing maybe some verses or chants, and then speak it. And as you speak it, clarify your enunciation, and then switch to reading and then to writing. Can't be helped these days. I think books are definitely more available when it comes to learning Sanskritam. So you probably will start with reading and then proceed after that. But that I thought was an interesting concept of how to learn a language, and I thought I'd share here. Cool. Some good habits. I can't be. I can't say that I follow all of them, but I do think that some of them definitely have helped me in maintaining a record of what I'm learning and also reinforcing my learning and making it easy for me to go back and review material. Because the Pravesha book is actually meant to be a sequential construction of ideas, it has broken down all of these aspects that I shared in the first slide about the basic vocabulary, the verb forms, the noun forms, etc. over a period of 10 chapters. But as you're learning it, I think it's fine to maintain a running notebook of all the vocabulary, for example, because it's much easier to go back and review them in one place than to jump around multiple chapters and read. And then keep a running notebook of all the Subhashitani. This is like one thing I do. They do appear in the exam, depending on where you're taking it, I think. But I'd be surprised if any of the regions do not test your memory on Subhashitani. So keep a running notebook of all of them and their meanings, either virtually or a physical copy. And then keep a practice workbook to test your memory on all of the different permutations and combinations that I discussed in the last few slides. So you have 2 types of verb forms, 4 tenses or forms, and 3 numbers and 3 persons. So that becomes 2 times 4, 8 times 3, 24, 24 times 3, 72. So 72 different combinations you'll have to learn, in terms of verbs. And for noun forms, it's 7 plus 1. 1 is a sambodhana. So when you say hey Ram is like a very different thing, compared to just Ram. So the so 8 times 3, 24. So you get clusters of 24 for every ending of a noun. So write them down in a book somewhere, or record yourself speaking or reciting them. Do your thing, whatever works for the memory. And then, definitely voice out the words loudly as you read the tables. This is another thing that I find particularly useful. Again, going back to the importance of pronunciation and sound. In Indian languages and in India in general, sound is actually very core to the culture. So it's everything is structured around the fact that something sounds a particular way. So vibrations are very important. So I think it is something that I would recommend. And I think the other thing is pronunciation habits, right? I've noticed this for not just myself, but like a lot of my peers as well. Whoever comes from different parts of the country, they have their own pronunciation nits. So for example, when you say Ram, you don't write the halant at the end of the Ram. So you just say Ra, Aki Matra, Ma, and no halant. So that still is Ram in Hindi. But in Samskritam, that is Rama. So it's not Ram. Ram would be Ra, Aki Matra, Ma, halant. So it's very precise that way. So when you read Rama, you have to say Rama. You can't say Ram. Similarly, I think Marathi and Telugu have the La occurring a lot. So, that is something that you kind of throw in once in a while when you say Mangalam, for example. That is not the pronunciation that actually occurs. Mangalam is the pronunciation. So different languages have a different twist to them. So that has just been developed over several hundreds of years. So getting rid of those personal quirks is going to be something that's going to be very important, because when you write things in Sanskritam, you have to write them exactly as you say them. So saying them correctly actually aids your writing accuracy. Finally, a note on noun endings. This I thought was also a very curious one. So I'm done with the good habits, but I just didn't have a place to put this particular thing, so I just threw it in here. One of the unique features of Sanskritam is that the gender actually doesn't depend on the meaning of the word, like in other languages. So this is not something that you normally think about. But so, for example, what gives something a gender, right? So in several languages it's pretty arbitrary as to like how the feminine gender is associated with something. Some languages don't even have the neuter gender, so they just have male and female, and everything in the world is male and female. So but how do you know, right? Like, and it's a difficult thing to trace down for some of the modern languages that are in India and outside of India. But in Sanskritam, the gender is actually determined by how a noun ending sounds. So anything that ends with a ki matra is female. Anything that ends with a ki matra could be male or neuter, but the male ends with aha, so ramaha, and the neuter ends with m, so it becomes phalam. So you get both are ending, but one has the visarga and the other doesn't, and it ends with makara. So so this is a very curious thing I thought about the language, that gender actually has nothing to do with the meaning, which was new for me when I saw this. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one whose mind is blown by this, but it actually makes things a lot easier, because then when you know that the gender just depends on the way the word sounds, then it actually becomes a lot easier for you to determine how to actually conduct the declensions of it and how to revolve your sentence around that particular word. So that is basically it. That's all I had to share with respect to Pravesha. Good luck to everyone who is taking on this exam and starting on this journey. I assure you it's a beautiful, beautiful one, and I think it's something that you will definitely enjoy and be very happy that you started. So all the best to everyone who is starting to register for the Pravesha exams. I will try to see if I can put the link to the exam registration details in the description here. If you folks want any other clarifications on the exam, please let me know in the comment section, and I am more than happy to share other things as well. We will finish with a Subhashitani, or Subhashitam rather. So this one is an interesting one because it has some misconceptions built in. So the Subhashitam, first let me recite it. Ayam nijaha paro veti ganana laghu chetasam udara charitanam tu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. So this is the Subhashitam. So the most recognizable part of the Subhashitam is vasudhaiva kutumbakam. So we have heard several external affairs ministers and politicians and any Indian philosophers of recent times quote this particular phrase over and over again, vasudhaiva kutumbakam. One thing I do want to clarify here is that this verse is actually not the verse, but at least the phrase is taken out of context and is assumed to mean unconditional inclusivity. So we say, vasudhaiva kutumbakam, so the world is one, which is a very good idea, but the context behind it is the people who think that way are the ones who actually have a large heart. So that is what the meaning of this Subhashitam is. So I'll read out the meaning. So it's the calculation that this person is mine, i.e. belongs to my group, and this person is not mine, is done by those who are narrow-minded. Those with strong character consider the whole world as their family. Strong character, large heart, udara charitanam. So this is a very important Subhashitam in the sense that whenever we think about inclusivity and we think about the world as being one, that is an indication that we have a mature level of thinking and we are not falling into this trap of creating tribal divisions among ourselves. So it's a great idea, and I think it's one of the more beautiful Subhashitams that I've come across. But yeah, with that I shall close for today. I'll try to see if I can dig up a little bit more details for the stuff that we talked about today and put out material. But as I mentioned, if you enjoyed the material and if you want to see more of a certain type of material, let me know in the comment section. I'm more than happy to cover that for you.